Well, thank you for coming back. Hopefully you enjoyed the birthday cake. We're certainly glad that we have this opportunity to share it together. For this afternoon's session, we're going to be having reminiscences from the Redd family siblings, and they've informed me they've sat in birth order so that you wouldn't get mixed up. Plus, it's always nice. I'm the youngest, so I always like the chance to rebuttal at the end. So we're happy to have Catherine, Hardy, Robert, Paul, Marilyn, Beverly, Regina, and Rebecca. We'll be here from 3:15 to 4:30, and we're delighted that they're willing to share with us. The people who had provided the microphones absconded with them, and we're trying to get them back, so we'll do the best we can with sharing what we have.
We'll thank them later.
So without further ado, we'll turn the time over to the Redds.
Do a sound check, Kathy.
Hello.
I'll turn it on. Try that.
Hello. You're okay? Still a little louder. Hello. I'm grateful to be here this afternoon with you. During the past 2 weeks, how's the hearing? Is it working all right? I'll start again. During the past 2 weeks, my daughters and I have been focused on sorting out some of the facts and fiction about Charles Redd. My daughter Wendy enjoys seeing the photo of Queen Elizabeth presenting him with the prestigious award. And here's an anecdote that she'd like me to share that illustrates some of the characteristics of Charlie. His lack of pretension, his devotion to his wife and family, his ability to squeeze the most out of life. Charlie preferred to spend nights at home after working and traveling all day, even though he often arrived at home past midnight. Occasionally, though, he might stop at a motel, planning to get an early start next morning. If there was a pool, he might grab a towel and jump in the pool. In the early hours of the day, no one would be up to see the skinny dipper. Traveling for business and pleasure was a big part of Charlie's life. Short trips and long, perhaps accompanied by Annaley, kids, some his, but some just hangers on, strangers, including his fathers. Everyone in our family, and many of you, has supplied tales of going places with Charlie. Indeed, he was often on the road. I remember going with him, I think it was in the 40s, to Logan, when the road was winding, and it took forever. As most of you know, he was an avid supporter of Utah State University. Later in his life, his favorite trips were those he took with Emily. Thank you.
This will be better if I'm standing. It will take less time. Charlie Redd was an engaged and strict parent, as strict with his children as he was in other parts of his life. He occasionally disciplined me severely, most often verbally. Like Tom Sawyer, I would prefer the whippings. He took some pains to send me on a trail herd to Colorado at age 7, gathering and branding camps thereafter with an occasional summer and sheep camps. At age 14, while living on 9th North and 1st East in Provo, he rented a small pasture, an old chicken coop and corral near where the Carolyn Bales now are. He brought 4 bulls up with a self-feeder so that we would learn some responsibility. I remember walking past the then under construction George Albert Smith Field House before daylight to break the ice on the water so the bulls could drink. Saturday mornings was for mixing and loading the self-feeder for the bulls. He did this, for me at least, so we would learn how to work and avoid the mischief and trouble that comes with idleness. Not appreciated then, but I appreciate now and love him for his efforts to keep me out of trouble, which generally worked, not always. There's one thing I learned by osmosis from Daddy and didn't realize until later in life, that my father was a classic liberal. Look it up. It meant being broad-minded and open-minded and examining everything, including church doctrine and practice. Reading widely in good books and from different viewpoints, testing and proving and retaining that which was good and utile. This required effort on his part and requires effort on anybody's part. Risking judgment, political and cultural unpopularity. Even though he wasn't in these folks I'm going to mention class, he was close to their class. It was dangerous. Witness Socrates, a guy named Jesus, Galileo, Luther, Joan of Arc, and Joseph. Though uncomfortable at times and jarring, it is the very best kind of way to live one's life. One of Daddy's sisters once asked my mother, "Why do you allow Charlie to order you around so peremptorily?" My mother answered, "Because he has idiosyncratic credit." That's psychobabble she picked up from somebody. Meaning he does so many good things for me that he's built up credit, including making her feel that she had value and giving her the confidence that she could do anything. No small thing for my mother. When I asked her once why she married Daddy, subtext, a man twice her age, my mother answered, "I loved him, of course, and he needed me." Annaley Redd was a positive, upbeat, cheerful. She created an orderly, clean, lovely home and garden for her husband, children, and the many invited guests. I recollect once her requiring me to put my scattered toys in the bedroom into a large drawer where the toys went. Then she left the bedroom, closing the door firmly behind her. She said, "I could hear the anger in the toys as they were thrown across the room in the direction of the drawer." I'm grateful for that lesson, that things ought to be kept in order and not require other people to clean up your messes. Once in Provo as a teenager, after being denied of something I wanted to do, I responded in frustration, "Why not? You let Kathy." She kindly responded, "Well, in the past, Kathy has shown herself to be responsible." I had no response. Finally, she rhapsodized over beauty, whether in art or nature, sunsets. When she had called the family to witness a sunset, my father would say with his tongue in his cheek, "There's not much romance in my soul." But anyway, literature and dance, and especially music, we always had classical music or musicals playing in our home. She belonged to and attended community concerts featuring such artists as Jascha Heifetz and Utah's own Grant Johansson. My sisters followed her example playing the piano. She insisted on the boys' participation in the BYU High School band, where we were introduced to the glories of Beethoven, Grieg, and many other composers. I will be forever grateful to her for that. Whenever a car trip was in the offing, the refrain from everybody was, "I don't care which car I go in, as long as it's the car that Annaley goes in." I'll close by echoing what Mark Twain said about his late wife, quote, "Wheresoever she was, there was Eden." Thank you.
I'm glad you got that part about everybody wants to ride in the car and Lee's going. In 1905,
Robert, will you hold it right up to your...
okay, I will. In 1905, Charlie's dad, L.H. Jr., bought the range rights for the Dark Canyon and Dark Canyon Plateau from D.M. Cooper and V.P. Martin. He put his 22-year-old son Hardy in charge of that new operation. Charlie, the 16-year-old, spent that summer as a cowhand on the plateau too. Back then, cattle wintered on the high elevation of the plateau and were gathered in the spring and moved down into the canyon for the summer because there was water all year long, all summer long down in the canyon, but there wasn't. They used snow on the plateau. 60 years later, Charlie, in 1965, reacquired that range, which had become part of the Somerville dugout unit in the meantime. So now I was sent there as temporary manager. Our father was nostalgic of his youthful experiences on the plateau. He made several trips to this very out-of-the-way range after the 1965 purchase. On one of those trips, he offered me a glimpse of his experience as a teenage cowboy that summer of 1905. I got to thinking, as Hardy was talking, how our father had this deep assumption that there was a better way to do all the things we do. He just had this assumption, there's got to be a better way to do that. It caused a lot of trouble. We were changing the way we moved cattle every year. There was a different corral. The cattle didn't know where to go. They weren't as progressive as our father was. Anyway, I love this story, and I offer my memory of our father telling it. He said, "It was my first time gathering half-wild cows from the backcountry, and I was eager to get to work. The older, easygoing cowhand helping me seemed to be a lot less eager. When we first came upon a few of these spooky cows, calves, and bulls, they ran away from us. I rushed after them to get them under control, but they got away, despite my great efforts, which included the considerable danger of riding at speed through the dense pinon forest. But we followed their tracks and eventually caught up to them. Spurring my horse, I again bolted to head them off, but old Bud hollers, 'Hold up, Charlie, I've got a roll of smoke.' He stopped and got out his sack of Bull Durham, turned to protect the process of rolling his own from the wind, then methodically folded the cigarette paper to receive some tobacco, rolled, licked, and carefully sealed the cigarette, dug out his matches, lit one, then bent into his cupped hands to light up. After a couple of puffs, he says, "Okay, Charlie, I'm ready." This old cowboy was so addicted to his tobacco that he had to have another smoke every time we caught up with this little bunch of cattle. Finally dawned on me that my hot pursuit spooked the cattle and just made them wilder. Eventually I saw that by slowly following wild cows from a distance, but staying on their tracks, would allow the cattle to fear us less and less, and finally let us move them to the gathering ground. Being such a compulsively conscientious kid, in such a hurry to get the job done, I was making the job harder. This seasoned cowboy's ruse of, "Hold up, Charlie, I need to roll a smoke," was the only way he could get me to slow down and begin to learn from cows how to gather wild cows.
Good. Well, as I've been thinking about the things that I guess made an impression on me, Marty talked about going on a trailer when he was 7. I did the same. On Grand Mesa from the south. With some yearlings. Chet Smith and Laura Wilden were both on the job for some reason. The last day we got monogram, neither one of them showed up at camp. And I learned later that somehow they got in a row, those two cattle foremen who were supposed to be working together. And anyway, they both come in sometime after dark. I didn't see them. But anyway, it was my first trail time. And I'm not sure whether this was in cahoots with my mother or to give her relief, but I seldom spent a summer at home. From that time on, I spent a summer when I was 9 years old with Benito and Pada Martinez on the mountain, moving sheep camps. The next summer I spent following an old horse named Duke on a scatter rake at Pine Lodge all summer, putting up hay. As a 10-year-old, I think I worked at the store with my cousin Oscar John Jameson, and I worked for Chet Smith. And Chet had a big influence on all of us boys, maybe girls too. But anyway, he was a bachelor cowboy and really ornery. He may not speak to you for a week, except when you did things wrong, which we often did. And I can remember gathering. We were bringing cattle toward the 3-mile corral to brand. And me and Ezra Brigade were on the tail end, and I saw a cow drop off into a wash, and so I went over there, and the idea of bringing her back. And I was down there probably half an hour and didn't get the cow, and came back, and Chet was there at the back. Ezra was gone, and Chet was. He says, "If you ever do that again, I'll get a cedar branch and beat you to death." So, but and I can remember my dad when George White was our manager. They had as Robert talked about, they were going to change the management of how we did things, and so and George says, "Well, I think that's a good idea, Charlie. But will you go tell Chet?" But anyway, he was a great teacher, and anyway, so I lived at home for 2 summers. Once when I was farming at LaSalle, working on the farm, and the summer I worked at the store. As a 14-year-old, I worked over the Lone Cone over in Colorado with Louis Wilson and Jack Armstrong. They were recently returned Korean War vets. Anyway, it was an education for me, and I got to believing that what they said. And so when I came home to visit, I started informing my dad how it could do better. And he listened patiently for a while, and he says, "You're too young to know everything." And it was true. I didn't know much. Anyway, my dad went to Australia and loved the environment there. Agriculture was king. And he came back and he made good friends wherever he went. But he wanted one of his boys to go down there. And I was the one, apparently. I don't know where Robert, he were on a mission, I think, in Finland. So anyway, I was just getting out of the army, and so I went to Australia for a year and spent a year down there doing all the things that my father dreamed of doing, working in shearing crews and in old stores and on the big ranges in the North Territory. Anyway, I had wonderful blessings of opportunity from Benito and Padre Martinez to going to Australia. I don't know how you could give a son a better start in life. I appreciate that.
Is it on? I'm going to kind of riff off Paul a little bit. I now realize that why Mother wanted him gone during the summer. It was a lot less shrieking from the three younger girls happening when he was away from home. So, thank you, Mom. That was a good plan. I've kind of gone back and forth with what I wanted to talk about today. I've changed several times, so you'll hear what I finally landed on. I had just gotten my driver's license, and Bev and I were going from LaSalle to Provo with Daddy. And it must have been November or December, because by the time we hit Price, there was a big snowstorm. And we were just getting to Helper and to go up Price Canyon. And Daddy pulled the car over and said, "Marilyn, would you drive?" And I love to drive, so yes, I would drive. But once I got behind the wheel and pulled out onto that road, that steep highway, with trucks coming at me and the blizzard coming down, and the windshield wipers not being able to keep up with the slush and muck that was hitting it every few seconds, I was terrified. And I was just white knuckling it the whole drive up that canyon. And I was obviously very focused, and it was a very scary drive for me, and maybe Dad too.
Wondered why Daddy asked you to drive.
Once we finally got up to the top of the canyon and going into Spanish Fork, I was able to take a deep breath and relax slightly. But I've thought back on that as we were coming into Provo, and I thought, why did Daddy ask me to do that? And what I realized, what was going on in my mind was, Daddy asked me to do that. He thought I could do it. I didn't think I could do it. He thought I could do it. And I did it. So that was a really special thing for me to understand about him and about myself. The other story I would like to tell is about Mother. I had been away at college and spent a summer working in D.C. When while I was in D.C., I made a number of really sweet friends. And I must have talked about them to Mother when I got home. And she said, "Why don't you invite some friends over and I'll cook dinner for all of you?" And I was just so pleased and surprised and thought it was so wonderful. So I did. I invited a few friends over. She spent hours in the kitchen preparing this fabulous meal. If any of you ever sat at Mother's table, you know her food is amazing and wonderful. She just waited on us and brought us this lovely dinner. And again, that was something I really valued. It was such a gift for her to do that for me and my friends, to have us give us that special evening, and that lesson of hospitality that Mother was able to portray for all of us was really influential with me. Thanks.
Oh dear. There's a couple of things that I thought about while I was thinking about this. The first one is when I was about 3 or 4, I remember sitting on my dad's lap while he was on the telephone in our house at LaSalle. If you know the house at LaSalle, we had one phone, and it was in the hallway. And he had a chair there, and I would crawl up in his lap and just lay against him. I just felt comforted. As a side note on our telephone thing, our phone number was 19R3, which meant 3 short rings. The office was 1 long ring, I think. Anyway, it's changed. But it took a while to change. My husband's family moved there when he was about 11, and they didn't have a phone. The phone was at the store. They had a payphone at the store. And one summer when I was 19, 20, I worked in Los Angeles as a telephone operator. And by chance, someone was making a call to my dad, I think. And they needed to know the number. And I already knew the number was 19R1. And later, I got called into my supervisor and said, "You're supposed to call the operator in Moab to find out that number." And I said, "Well, I already knew it." Because it's my dad. My dad, when we were little, we would ask him for money to buy candy at the store. He would send us out picking up nails on the roads. And we got I think $10 a pound, I'm not really sure. Of course. Yeah. Well, anyway, and that's a lot of nails. One time, several years ago, I showed my nieces and nephews how much it is, and it's quite a bundle of nails to get a pound. The summer I was 17, I worked for my dad in the office in Hardy, and I transcribed his letters. He had a recording device, and then I would listen to them and type them up. And one of the letters I wrote was to his sister Marion, who lived in San Francisco. And I typed it up, and it got sent. And a week later, Dad called me into his office and said Aunt Marion was not very happy with me because I hadn't put a personal note on the letter that I sent to her. I didn't think that was quite how office people were supposed to do, but anyway. One of the things I admired about my mother, and there's many things, but when we lived at the cabin on the mountain, there were a lot of wildflowers, and she knew all the scientific names to these wildflowers as we go along. And I was so impressed with that. I just was amazed. And no
I love listening to my siblings. I love them so much. We have slightly different experiences, oldest and youngest. And whereas Hardy said Daddy was hard, by the time we came on, he wasn't so hard.
And that may have had something to do with the division of labor. In a farm and rancher wife-husband combination, it's a little different than my life with my husband. Mother did all the work in the house, all the work outside of the house, and essentially all the young child rearing. And so she worked very hard. There was a little division of labor too in the kitchen. We basically weren't allowed without permission to be in her kitchen because we got in the way. But Daddy could go in. She was not liking it. What I remember him just before a football game, he would go in and get his pine nuts and previously perfectly good frying pan. He would heat up the frying pan and roast these pine nuts on the stove, make a mess, and Mother would just be silently fuming, and off they go to the game. And so she didn't say anything, and she forbore getting after him, but that was kind of her domain. I too remember the trips with Daddy, and I think he liked having us go because we were gate openers. But the thing I loved about being in the car with him, I was like a fly on the wall. He would get in his mind about where he was going, the meeting he was going to have with someone, and he would rehearse out loud what he wanted to talk to them about. And so I was able to kind of get his thinking, how he felt about the person, or what kind of job they were doing, if it was a business associate. It was a treasured experience, and I was so grateful for that. I think my mom was an Anna Green Gables. She loved beauty, and I think all of us, I didn't get all her ability to enjoy beauty, but I really can't see a sunset without actually feeling my soul enlarge with joy, and that came from her. Once in the mountain cabin at breakfast, Mother did a lot of things, and I've been talking today, and they say we didn't make cheese every day, but it seemed like every day, and which required taking care of 10 gallons of milk, 5 from the night before and 10 gallons from the morning, and the 5 gallons she made cheese, and 5 gallons we separated into cream and drinking, and it required a lot of washing and a lot of care besides the other things, the washing of clothes. We had a generator that we ran just to wash the clothes. The rest of the time we played cards by candlelight. But one morning we were there, and my dad was making a helpful suggestion about how we, the girls, could be doing more to help Mother. And she very kindly, but somewhat curtly said, "You take care of the boys, and I'll take care of the girls." And it was maybe unspoken before then, but I kind of see as I look back that that's really how it was. And very only once in a while did she interfere. Like, I appreciated Marilyn's comment about him putting us in positions because he thought we could do things. And he had me drive more than a truckload of wool bags on top of just a very small regular pickup. That it was so heavy it blew tires, and I got help, but when we got to Provo, my mom was fuming, and just like, you can't make Gina drive to the ranch with those. So they tied 2 of those bells, and they are big, onto his car. And I with 2 of my 16-year-old friends, we drove to the ranch in this. Oh, we did get new tires. I think they were probably retreads, not new, but anyway, I drove to the ranch. And so that feeling of having someone expect you and thinking that you can do it does give you power to do things that you don't know you can do. My mom, I think, protected, I don't know what the right word is, but she, in giving opportunities, whether it's feeding your friends, for me, school was important, and I didn't ever slough, or really didn't want to slough, but she allowed me to miss school for some things. One of them was when Sonny, who was a certified ski instructor, came up from the ranch to go skiing at then Temp Haven. My mom let me get out of school and go skiing all day. I had some wonderful lessons with Sonny. And then my parents were Republicans, obviously, and they did not like, my mom in particular made comments, did not like the Kennedys, the parents and then the president, but she respected the office. And when he was assassinated, the school allowed, I guess, us to listen to some things, but my mom invited me to stay home and watch the TV procession. So all day long we watched the procession, the funeral. And I appreciated the grace in which she was able to support, be patriotic for a person that personally she may not like, but she appreciated the office and she supported and was civil in her comments about him. And that's the kind of grace that I wish, that I want, and I want this country to have. As my dad talked about the importance of studying history, basically so that we don't repeat mistakes, I've appreciated what the Redd Center's done, and I appreciate the friendships we've had. I appreciate the Cummings candy eggs, Jesse, but the affection that we feel. And if we can, as siblings, create that sense of adventure that my dad had and willingness to take risks, and also the grace and hospitality of my mother, what a wonderful world this will be.
You know, I think that's a good ending, because I'm really the afterthought of the family. But I'll do the best I can. You know, many of my memories with my parents really are at the mountain cabin. I think we moved up there when I was about 5-ish. And it was a paradise for me. I thrived. I know it was hard on my mother. That first year we were in Chet's cabin and we had to haul water, and you know, I'm just a little kid. This is fun. I had no idea the work until much later in my life. But Mother tried to give us opportunities to help. She did, and we had these beautiful windows that looked out over into Colorado. And I think that my sisters and I felt like maybe we washed them every day. It felt like it, and I probably didn't wash them every day because my mother, she believed in good nutrition and good sleep, I think. And so I would stay sleeping, and my sisters would be up and having to do their work, and she would let me sleep, and I don't think they appreciated that. But Mother said if the sunlight could come and hit her face and she still sleeps, she must need it. So we did a little window washing. But other than that, we kind of stayed out of her way a little bit, and we went and picked wildflowers. We were taught beauty wherever we were, whether it was the view out to Colorado, or a sunset, or a beautiful flower, or even some little plant growing up through the sandstone. She would point it out to us, and I am so grateful for the influence of my life, and the hard work. And she did not complain. She really did not. But I'll just tell you one really quick story about with my dad. We had this big horse called Rusty, and I probably learned to ride on that horse. Very dependable, wonderful horse. And my dad and I went for a ride. He loved to just ride where it didn't necessarily the trail, just go out and see how the grass was growing and how things were looking. And there were also a few beaver ponds in the area, and beaver ponds, there are lots of logs down, and sometimes it's hard to pick your way through. And so we came across this beaver pond. It looked dry. It looked totally dry over, and Daddy was ahead of me, and he went right through, and all of a sudden down he went, probably up to the belly of Rusty, and he was a big horse. And he quickly got off and tried to get Rusty to come. Beaver Pond is not a very big pond, so it wasn't huge, but this horse was in trouble, and so he was pulling it, and then he asked me to get a switch and then to hit Rusty from behind. And I did, and, you know, a little tap, and
And then he had to keep telling me, you've got to hit. It was hard on me, but I did learn to do what my dad asked me to do. And we got that horse out and rode back to the cabin and spent the rest of the day, a long time. And my dad stayed with it, which surprised me a little bit, cleaning that mud, that beaver mud that is like glue off this horse. And it was quite a job. And I don't think I'd ever seen my dad be so patient before I worked to get that mud off. And then I'm sure the next day he worked on the saddle, because that was very important to him too, how we took care of our saddles. But I just feel like I lived a charmed life, because that mountain cabin was just a paradise to me. And our parents, I really felt loved and sometimes pushed on to do hard things, but it was for my good. Thank you.
We want you to know that the Redd Center's got some competition. The Redd Foundation established a chair in religious studies at Utah State University and started a religious studies program there that is very successful. Ravi Gupta, stand up, Ravi. He looks like he's from India, but he's really not. He's from Boise, Idaho. But his parents are from India. So I just wanted to introduce you to Ravi. He's done such a good job, they've made him department head of the history department at Utah State. Okay, Ravi, that's all you're going to get. And second of all, I could introduce everybody, but second of all, a good friend of ours who was born in Monticello and raised in her early life in Monticello, and then went on to entertain Johnny Carson and Jane Pauley, Diane Thomas, who knows how to build a fire and cook a meal without anything, just cook a meal with anything outdoors. And so I just wanted to introduce those.
You should stand up. They want to see you.
What I should say is it's such a privilege to go down and be with Hardy and Sonny to see that beautiful country and have them reminisce. It's been a pleasure of mine. Thank you.
I've told Diane, as I've told other people, most of what I've told you is true.
The problem is I don't know what isn't.
So we do have a little bit more time. Perhaps we could have each of you go through one more time and introduce yourself, so we have it on film of who you are. And then if you want any addendums to what you've said, or to rebut or enhance other stories that have been told, we can do that. And then we could also entertain some questions after that. So if we just have each of the children introduce themselves, so we have you on tape, and then you can say a few more things if you would like. We still have another 20 minutes.
Hi, I'm Catherine Ann Redd with an E, but not Ann with the E. Fred Mullins, I'm often known as Cat.
She began with her husband and still runs a independent bookstore in Solvang, California. Has 3 lovely daughters and a lot of lovely grandchildren. I'm Charles Redd, always called Hardy, or except when I got in trouble, it was Hardy Boy.
I'm Robert Byron Redd. I never got in trouble. So there's another Dark Canyon story that I want to tell on Charlie, and some of you people will understand this story. I think he was nostalgic about his youth on that area. He went back several times. One time with John Hale Gardner and 2 other innocent BYU professors, he made a trip from Provo, 5-hour trip, 6-hour trip down, and then another 2 hours to get out onto the Dark Canyon Plateau. Stop at the camp where we were, and we were gone. And so we went on down another 7 miles, where Charlie ran over a rock and pierced the oil pan, the oil ran. Well, John Hale and one of the other fellows walked back to the camp, found a 5-gallon oil can that was half full, but it was empty. Got an axe and some gunny sack material, walked back down to the car. John Hale got under the car and enlarged the split in the oil pan, watered up some gunny sack and put in there, and then hammered the crack back with the axe, put in the oil, and they drove back to Provo that night. That's the kind of trip you take with Charlie.
I remember going on just a little trip in the evening.
Say your name.
Oh,
All three names. All three names.
I'm Paul David Redd.
Where were you born?
I was born in a mud hole on the way to the hospital. Two things. Often Daddy would take us on trips, and even when we had a short time after World War II, we had a Jeep. But even then, he would end up getting stuff. Rusty wasn't the only thing he got stuff. And Hardy, as a young boy, my mom would say, when my dad would go off the main road, and you call it a gosh road, is that what you call it?
Gosh road.
Gosh road, anyway, because mother was saying, I don't know who was saying gosh.
Probably mother.
Anyway, the other thing, when we moved to Provo, my dad's best friend was a nuclear scientist, John Hill Carter, across the street. And he loved being near the university and in the environment here. He loved it. And maybe down in LaSalle, he didn't really have a chance to mingle with folks who were as widely read as he was and what he traveled. Anyway, the other thing is, what I've done in my life for the most part is perpetuate the registered cattle operation. And so this next April 9th, my daughter will be selling 200 bulls to cattlemen in the Fort Myers area. Often when I write a welcome to our prospective buyers, I talk about the attitude of my father. Is that years ago, I think it was in the 60s, he gave a talk back at Purdue on animal days back there, and he just told them, we've got to do a better job. And he talked about chickens. You can get a pound of chicken for about a pound of feed. Pigs, you can get a pound of meat with maybe 3 pounds of feed. Cattle, it might be 8 or 10 pounds of feed. They were just terribly inefficient. Anyway, he was never satisfied with the profitability of the cattle business. And so when we got into the registered cattle business, initially to find cattle that would survive better on the range and make them better adapted, we were looking for better ways, and we began. George White thinks our old scales at LaSalle probably was not working right most of the time. He thinks maybe we lost money with them, but he believed in measuring. He believed in the old adage, if you can measure it, you can improve it. And when the first Colorado State ran the first bull test, they wondered if he would send a few bulls. He sent 50 bulls to it. They were looking for 5, but he sent 50. When Colorado State, Utah State, and New Mexico State, and the USDA wanted to do a big wool improvement program, we put 22,000 ewes in sheared each one, put a ring around their neck with a number, weighed their fleece, measured the weight and the clean weight of it, and graded the quality of the wool, and then it came back, and of those 22,000, we had 1,000 supers, and they produced the rams for the A flock, which was 5,000, next 5,000 best used, and then the next 10,000 ewes or so, or the rest of the ewes were bred to black raced or crossbred, so cross for meat. So anyway, it was a very ambitious program and very successful. He sent me to Australia because he knew we weren't taking very good care of our wool. He was the president of the National Wool Board Marketing Association. Went to Boston for a month each winter. Anyway, he was a guy with big ideas, and we had a great chance to follow him.
I'm Marilyn Redd Rasmussen. I married Richard Rasmussen, a Dane from Brigham City, Utah. We both met and graduated from Utah State. One more little story about Daddy. We always wanted to go with him. It was always going to be an interesting adventure, so we always were chasing after him and wanting to get in the car with him. So one day I was lucky enough to get in the car with him. I was probably about 5 or 6. We were at the ranch, and he was going off. I didn't really care where he was going. I just wanted to go with him. He was going to visit some of the small farmers that were near LaSalle. And we were pulled up in front of this very humble home, and with a windmill for getting the water for their home. And before we went in, he said, "Marilyn, this is going to be a little unusual for you. They're not used to keeping house like you are used to with your mother. And you're not to say anything or ask anything or act straight. You need to keep a straight face and behave yourself." So we went in, and it took all my urges to just keep still. There were chickens walking along the kitchen counters, and anyway, they sat down. There were only 3 chairs, so the husband and wife sat down, and Daddy sat down, and I kind of held on to Daddy's shoulder and listened to them chat. And Daddy just asked them how they were doing, talked about the weather, how the crops were, how the water was. He was just so generous with his interest in them. And it was a lovely memory and moment for me to see how he treated somebody, and he wanted me to treat them the same way.
I'm Beverly Redd Woods. I mentioned earlier my husband's family moved to LaSalle when he was about 11, and we eventually dated and got married. So I always said I wouldn't marry someone that didn't love LaSalle as much as I did, and I found the guy that loves LaSalle as much as I did. One little story about Daddy: when we lived in the mountain cabin, he just had a regular sedan car, and so often he would take us girls. Did you do the rock?
Of course.
Okay. I just remember Gina and sometimes Becky, and he would drop us off and say to walk towards the highway, and he would be back. He only planning to be there, a couple of hours at the office, and then he'd come back. Well, one day he let us off, and we walked and picked up rocks. Yeah. I was never really sure about what kind of rocks it meant. When I learned how to drive, I figured out that it was the big rocks that might great big oil pan. But anyway, so we walked and we finally got to the highway, and Gina's shoes were worn out. And so she sat on a rock and I kept walking, because I like to walk. And I got picked up by by a truck driver that was doing and he asked me my name and I gave him a false name. And had him let me out at the store, and he did. Just a little bit of a side note to that. My husband has been given a ride when he was working at the sawmill there, and the guy took him 8 miles beyond LaSalle to LaSalle Junction instead of dropping him off at LaSalle. Anyway, but and then I walked down to Daddy's office, and he was very surprised to see me. And Gina came in.
I got a ride with the Steels.
That's right.
And I don't remember last time.
Okay.
Yeah, because Daddy was a little bit mad.
Yeah. Anyway. So from then on, he would take us further down and we'd walk back
And say,
towards
walk
the
back.
cabin. He learned his lesson.
Yeah, those were the good old days. Regina Redd Mitchell, often go by Gina. I married James Jim Mitchell. His great-great-grandfather was Carl G. Mazer. So we have BYU blood in us. He went to BYU elementary all the way through. When he was in 2nd or 3rd grade, a new boy came into the class, and his name was Paul Redd. And he was always beating up on Jim. And so Jim and I were talking about this really recently, and I said, well, was he like being a bully, or was he just, tussling? And he said he was just tussling, but he scared me. And apparently the teacher had a little unit she developed talking about how we don't hit and we don't whatever, and he stopped. So he's a very good learner.
And I am Rebecca Sue Redd Lambert. Apparently, Rebecca wasn't the first choice of names for me. But,
Tell them that story.
well, I was there, but I don't remember it. But dear friends of ours, Celestia Taylor, and she makes me she's just the dearest woman. Anyway, they were going to name me after Celestia, and then my dad got up and didn't do that. He said Rebecca Sue, and I think it surprised my mother. But Celestia always, every time I would be around her, she would remind me that you were supposed to be named after me, and I love her and love her name. So I'm grateful for that. Just one little quick thing. I was not a very good eater. Even though my mother was an amazing cook, I don't know why, I just didn't like anything. But my dad would tell stories, and he made up stories about Jimmy Woods, and these episodes of Jimmy Woods, and do I wish that we had taped that, and I would just be so enthralled with the story that I wouldn't realize how much I cleaned the plate. I could not leave the table until I finished, and I would often have a glass of milk at the table, and it took me a while to learn that it's better cold than warm, and Mother would have all the dishes washed, dried, and put away, and I would still be sitting there with that glass of milk, and I couldn't leave until it was done. So I did learn, but it was important for her. She wanted her kids to have good nutrition because she did not have that opportunity growing up. And my dad was very patient with me and told me these wonderful stories.
Why we have you here, maybe some in the audience don't understand what BY High and Brigham Young Academy and BYU and all of those things. Could you tell us a little bit about your experiences going to school?
Well, I was in the last class, 1968. went to Utah State.
It was a BYU training school to train teachers.
Use the microphone.
Laboratory High School. is what-
Laboratory high school.
And it wasn't like.
We did have some great teachers. I don't know if people remember Julia Kane. A strange fact is my first grade teacher's name was Julia McCain.
Already say into the microphone what it was. They didn't hear you. You got to say into the mic.
What you said was here.
Well, BYU
Tell the
High,
cigarette story.
I always ask people if they live in Provo, and I say, I went to high school in Provo City, but it wasn't Provo High. Where did I go? About 10% get it, have known BYU High School. BYU High School was down where the library is now. There was another building adjacent to it that's been raised. And there was an elementary school there, early days. On lower campus where that was, the music department was there, and the drama department was there, and the art department was there, and the elementary and high schools. BYU was a much smaller school in those days. And then there was 3 or 4 buildings on the upper campus where we are now. But anyway, we would have student teachers come in, and my recollection was we developed the fine art of really testing whether or not they wanted to go into education. But there were some very fine people that went there. Alan Oakes went there. I was in Kathy's class, I think. And I went to school with Bob Oakes, who went on to become a 4-star general, his cousin, Merrill Oakes, Dallin's brother, and just some really exceptionally fine people went there. I'm so glad. I think there was a small tuition paid, but I'm just really grateful for the influence of wonderful people like Dick Gunn and Julia Kane and Anna B. Hart, and just a wonderful influence of these really good people that taught us.
Well, my siblings have reminded me of a lot of good stories, but I'm only going to give you hopefully 2 short ones. Don't know the order. One of them about my mother. She was as you heard, a fine housekeeper. Nothing pleased her as having a clean house. And when she was almost 90, she lived in a restored, maybe it's 80, restored home of her, or it was a warehouse of her grandfather. But one day she fell down the stairs and broke her ankle. What she had done is, I think it was the first break she'd ever had, even with a hard life. But she says, well, I was I just was so happy to have that clean house, but I slipped on the stairs I came down. I don't know which part of the story to start, but my mother was a very good athlete. Sometimes I don't know if we always appreciated what an athlete she had been and was. But in the 60s, my dad was one of the alternate delegates to the Republican National Convention that I believe was in Miami. And in those days, there weren't quite as many women convention delegates, but they had a lot of activities planned for the spouses. And there was a famous exercise, running guru, I can't remember what his name was. It could have been Jim Fix, but I'm not sure. But anyway, who advocated the great benefits and longer life you can get by running. And my mother signed up for that and enjoyed it very much, and she did a little running. And you've heard the stories about the mountain cabin. One day Chet, the sometimes bad-tempered cowman came in and, some damn woman's been running all over this mountain. And of course, now you won't have any trouble guessing who it was.
So I think, Hardy, there was a picture of you in the newspaper that they wanted the story told on tape.
Maybe we should tell you.
I'll begin by saying I was completely innocent. I was on the staff of the BYU Wildcat newspaper, and as we were riding up to visit the Desert News, some of those wicked senior boys on the staff passed out chocolate cigarettes. They were all white in white wrappers, but they were completely chocolate on the inside, I swear. And when we got there, we visited with the publisher, Mark Peterson, who was also an apostle, and toured the thing, and they took a group picture. And I was really dumb, still am, but when they took that picture, I thought nothing of it. A few days later, I was in class, and Ira Young, one of the teachers, came and said, "You need to come and see the principal." And I did a quick search of my memory and couldn't think of anything that I'd done that would cause me to be called to the principal's office. On the way there, we passed another teacher, Virginia Polson. With tears in her eyes, she said, "Oh, Hardy, you've ruined our school." So I got a little more serious. When I got there, they confronted me with the photographic evidence. There I was, hanging in this group picture of the Wildcat staff with what looked like a cigarette hanging out of my mouth. And I guess probably Brother Mark Peterson probably got that. And I'm just guessing about this, but the word may have come down to Ernie Wilkinson, who came, then the word went on to the Dean of Education, and then came down to the principal of BYU High School. And I had to stay out of school one day while they checked this out. And in fact, I was going to be expelled, and I was going to have to go see an apostle, get reprimanded. And I guess they found out my relative innocence, and I was allowed to come back into school. And so that's the story about the time I almost got kicked out of school.
Well, thank you. That concludes this portion of the symposium. For those of you who have RSVP'd and have a reservation, we have the banquet tonight at the Sky Room. It will be at 5:30, so if you could be there about 5:20, that gives us 40 or 50 minutes to visit and leisurely take our time over. We certainly appreciate the Redds and all of you for joining us for this event. And we also look forward to seeing everyone here at 7 p.m. for the Annaley Redd lecture by Gregory Smoke. So come back here at 7 to join us for that. Thank you very much. One more round of applause.